Hey, it's Dan. A quick heads up that today's show discusses mental health and self-harm. If you or someone you know is in crisis, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Everyone agrees America is failing a whole bunch of the some 14 million adults who have serious mental illness. Too many of them end up in places that offer little help.
A vicious cycle takes ill people from the streets to the hospital to jail and then back again.
It's expensive, ineffective, and often inhumane.
Criminally ill defendants sitting in jail waiting for treatment.
Emergency rooms are ground zero in our country's growing mental health crisis.
The federal government is testing out one controversial fix, pouring lots of money into locked psychiatric facilities where they hope people can stabilize and quickly get back into their communities. But critics warn these sorts of places have a long history of bad care. Today, what role should modern-day mental institutions play in America? From the studio at the Leonard Davis Institute at the University of Pennsylvania, I'm Dan Gorenstein. This is Tradeoffs. We're telling today's story with help from senior producer Leslie Walker. Leslie, hello.
Hey, Dan. How's it going?
Good, thanks. So, look, as we laid out at the top, the United States has really struggled to care for people with serious mental illness, and many experts and advocates believe that one big reason why is we just don't have enough good places for people to go when they're in crisis to get the meaningful help that they need. So policymakers with this federal experiment are testing some ways to try to change that. Leslie, you've been reporting on this for several months now. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so this is a project actually started under President Trump during his first term. But, it's picked up more steam recently. And we've now got Medicaid programs in 16 states, red and blue, plus Washington, D.C. on board. And while the effort, Dan, has a few different elements to it, the bulk of the hundreds of millions of dollars that the feds are doling out here is for the most intensive kind of mental health care around.
We're talking locked inpatient and residential facilities.
That's right. Places dedicated to 24/7 care for people with serious mental illness. Primarily, we're talking about mental hospitals, but could also be nursing homes, other kinds of residential and rehab type facilities. And experts like UC Davis psychiatrist Ruth Shim see this kind of care as essential for some folks who are really spiraling.
In some ways, I think of it as the same as any type of physical condition. Most people who have diabetes can manage their diabetes not in the hospital, but every now and then you might have a severe flare-up that would require you to go into the hospital for stabilizing.
Instead of people struggling on the street or ending up in jail, which can happen, people could do a stint at one of these inpatient mental health facilities.
So I see somewhere to find their footing for a week or two, see some doctors, sort out their meds.
Exactly. Right now, though, it's just really hard to find a bed in these places. And so with this experiment, the federal government is sending state Medicaid programs all this money to help them build out their capacity. Now, at the same time, Dan, everyone wants to be very careful. First, this kind of care is super expensive. We're talking hospital level $1,000 a day stays, often for weeks. And it's very restrictive. People are sometimes sent to these places involuntarily. They're held behind locked doors. Staff can physically restrain them, give them drugs against their will.
Right. While this experiment is built on the idea that we can have modern-day inpatient facilities be part of the solution, part of a more robust mental health care system, it sounds like, Leslie, you're also saying the architects of this plan are very aware of the risks that these places can pose.
Yeah, the people behind this experiment appreciate that our country has turned to mental hospitals as a solution before, and it turned out pretty ugly.
The first state superintendent described Byberry as a medieval pest house.
By the 1960s,
nobody can possibly know the despair of coming into a place like this. Except
the situation for many of our political leaders had become intolerable.
Our chief aim is to get people out of state custodial institutions and back into their communities and homes without hardship or danger.
President John F. Kennedy in a 1963 speech basically said we should abolish these places. I mean, facilities were short-staffed, investigations revealed these sprawling state hospitals had cut corners, people were being warehoused. It was a disgrace.
Today, nearly one-fifth of the 279 state mental institutions are fire and health hazards. 3/4 of them were opened before World War II.
Not long after JFK gave that speech, Dan, Congress banned Medicaid from paying for care inside most inpatient facilities. Around then, state mental hospitals also started to send tens of thousands of folks out. Some even shut down.
So the pendulum, in effect, swung pretty far in the other direction, away from institutional care.
That's right. And what's interesting and tricky to me about this federal experiment happening now is it's part of this more recent effort by health officials to find some kind of middle ground. They're saying, look, we leaned too hard on mental hospitals before. That was a disaster. But, choking off Medicaid funding has been bad too. It's left us relying too much on jails and other places less equipped to help people. So this pilot project is kind of an effort in some ways to find a right-sized role for this institutional care in today's mental health care system.
Got it. And just to be clear here, Leslie, we're not talking about reviving those World War II era state hospitals, right? I mean, these institutions of today look pretty different.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan. A lot of these places are now owned by private companies. They're much smaller. We're talking 100 beds instead of 1,000. And of course, care has evolved a lot, since the era of lobotomies.
All right, Leslie. I mean, I get that. I can hear that. But I got to think folks thought that they had nice, reasonable plans for those mental hospitals that ultimately turned into these terrible, awful places where people were being warehoused. So what are the feds doing with this pilot to avoid some of the problems of the past?
Yeah. You read my mind here, Dan. They basically attached two big strings to this money I want to tell you about. One, states have to take steps to improve the quality of care happening behind those locked doors and take steps to shorten stays, right? So that nobody's staying longer than they need to. And two, states also have to invest in other places in the community for people in crisis to go that are less restrictive and generally cheaper. We're talking walk-in centers, mobile care teams to de-escalate situations in people's homes or on the streets.
I mean, meaningful places for people to go when they leave these institutions. And I'm guessing if those places are good enough, in theory, they should also keep more people out of these institutions in the first place, or at least keep the stay shorter.
That's right. And of course, this all sounds good. It all makes sense. But the big question here is, will these two guardrails work? Or do these facilities become, at best, some kind of expensive Band-Aid on a broken system?
And at its worst, something out of that JFK speech, real hazards to people's health and their dignity. When we come back, one state's plan to head off those concerns, and one family's journey through America's often ineffective mental health system. Welcome back. With the help of senior producer Leslie Walker, we're looking at a controversial experiment that's opening a flood of federal funding for short-term stays in psychiatric institutions. Leslie, for the second half of the show, I asked you to show us how one Medicaid program is taking on this opportunity and the challenges, the very real challenges that come with it. So where are we headed?
Well, I was actually thinking we could just stay in my backyard in the Golden State. California is one of the newest states to join this experiment. They're also the biggest. Their plans for this entire 5-year project could cost well over $5 billion. And one other thing, Dan, California's Medicaid chief, Tyler Sadwith, is very open about the dark history hanging over this whole project. It's one of the first things he mentioned when we spoke.
We know that historically speaking, People with mental illness have been put in, asylums, in sanitariums. People have been in facilities and in institutions, sort of warehoused away from society.
Tyler told me that while he appreciates that this federal money can help open up institutional beds for people who need them, what he's really excited about is the chance to improve care inside these facilities and, most importantly, I think, to expand services out in the community.
Those are the two guardrails or requirements that Washington is putting on this money.
Right. Tyler believes that if the state gets those two things right, then California might actually see fewer people needing to use this kind of inpatient care and shorter stays when they do.
That's what we're talking about, is making sure people are able to be in the community and not be staying in institutions unnecessarily or longer than they need to be.
That said, Dan, critics of this experiment tell me they're pretty skeptical California can pull this all off. And in my reporting, I met this one local family whose experience, I think, helps capture why California and so many other states really, face such a steep hill to climb here.
I am Teresa Pasquini. I'm 70 years old, just recently.
Teresa lives in Benicia, California. She's a proud mom of 2 grown kids. For almost half of her life, Teresa's managed the care of her son, Danny, who's struggled with schizophrenia and drug use since his early teens. He's now 43 years old, and Teresa told me he's seen the inside of locked psych facilities more than 40 different times.
You shouldn't have to fail 40 times, and that happened to Danny over and over and over again.
Ideally, Leslie, right, you'd hope maybe after a few stints, Danny would have gotten the support he needed to stay safe, healthy, stable, but not 40.
Yeah, Teresa thinks a big part of why Danny's bounced around so much is because of those 2 issues California's hoping to tackle. Bad care inside a lot of these institutions and just not enough places to go on the outside. Teresa told me this story that helped me understand why getting bad quality care can be so damaging. Back in 2012, Danny got sent to this facility that Teresa knew almost immediately was a bad fit.
Dingy, dark. I didn't feel any light.
She kept trying to get him moved. Then one day, her phone rang.
I got a phone call, will you accept charges from Napa County Jail?
Danny had assaulted a patient on his unit.
And it felt terrible that he was in danger and that he had harmed somebody else.
Danny spent the next 4 years awaiting trial, cycling between jails and state hospitals, sometimes in solitary confinement. Ultimately, charges were dismissed. Teresa believes the facility had mismanaged Danny's meds, isolated and restrained him, bad care that she says sent him spiraling.
I mean, Leslie, that is obviously a terrible outcome, but it's also just one story at one facility. Did you get a sense from your reporting of how common this kind of inadequate care is?
Yeah, that's a question that NYU professor Alex Barnard has looked into. He spoke to 300 folks involved at every level of California's mental health care system for this book that he published about the system's shortcomings.
I think in some ways the stories that stuck with me the most were the people who really captured how superficial and pointless a lot of the services were.
Superficial and pointless. Dan, those 2 words really jumped out to me. So I asked Alex what he meant by that. He did this one interview that really captured the spirit of what he heard again and again. It was this patient who was in a facility who was seen by a doctor once a month for 15 minutes.
And he realized eventually that all the doctor wanted was for him to say, yes, I have schizophrenia, I can identify my voices, and I will take my medication.
Once the patient repeated that enough times, they let him back into the community. Almost immediately, he stopped taking his meds, wound up right back in the hospital.
Even though, he was in a setting that cost hundreds of dollars a day for him to be there. And all he was getting was a med check-in every month and some groups that he thought treated him like a child.
So Dan, to answer your question, based on research by Alex and others, I'd say, unfortunately, this kind of subpar care is quite common.
Leslie, I'm curious too about safety. It sounds like a lot of people, at least, are getting mediocre care. But are these dangerous places to be?
The data here is really hard to come by, Dan, but the researcher who's maybe doing more to unearth that than anyone else is Morgan Shields at Washington University in St. Louis.
Verbal abuse, physical abuse, almost 1,000 complaints related to sexual abuse.
Morgan's talking there about this first of its kind study that she authored looking at complaints and the kinds of big facilities we could see more of thanks to this pilot. What she found, Dan, compared to other types of psych settings, those bigger places had more than triple the rate of complaints. Journalists have turned up other problems too, understaffing, violence, patients held longer than necessary just so these facilities can make more money.
Okay, so step back here, Leslie. I mean, hearing Danny's story plus this research from Alex and Morgan, it sounds like the care some people get inside these institutions can be anywhere from ineffectual to downright abusive. You say that California wants to improve the quality of care in these facilities. How are they going to go do it?
Well, let's start with the safety concerns. The state says it's impossible to police entirely on their own, so they're funneling this new federal money only to places that are licensed and accredited. Plus, they're counting on insurers to make sure their members get good care. Second, Dan, the state's focusing on the beginning and the end of people's stays. At the start, the intake, they're requiring every facility to screen folks, not just for mental illness, but also their physical health, addiction, their social stability, do they have housing? At the end, on the discharge, they want facilities doing more follow-up to make sure folks like Danny have somewhere meaningful to go.
Yeah, I mean, getting that transition right seems essential if you want to see more folks getting out of and staying out of these places for good.
Absolutely.
All right, Leslie. So that's what Tyler's team is up to when it comes to the care happening inside of these facilities. Let's talk about what's happening in the community. You've mentioned several times now that there are shortcomings here too. What's the issue?
Well, I mean, ever since the U.S. started that mass migration of folks back in the 1960s out of big state mental hospitals, we've just really struggled as a country to get people the help they need to live on their own. I mean, Teresa Pasquini told me this is what frustrates her the most about the current system we have. Even if you do get great care inside one of these places, it's just not enough.
I think it's the cruelest thing we do is to take away someone's rights, lock them up, get them into the best shape ever, promise that they're going to come back to the community, and then, let them fall off the cliff again.
There was this one place Danny landed back when he was 27. This is like 16 years ago, after another one of his stints in a locked facility. And it sounded kind of perfect. I mean, he'd get his own apartment. It came with all these services to help him stay safe, independent, whatever it takes, the provider told Teresa. 3 weeks later, she got a call from Danny's girlfriend.
Saying Danny's been carving on his throat all night, trying to kill himself. And she said, we called the help number, the number that they were told to call 24/7, and nobody answered.
Teresa immediately hung up and called 911 herself. Police arrived. Danny got tased, sent to the hospital, ultimately wound right back up in another inpatient facility.
These stories, Leslie, are really painting a picture for me of how the larger mental health system can fail people like Danny. Sometimes it's the big locked institutions. Other times it's the services out in the community. What's California's plan to improve the community-based care?
So the state is kind of dangling this financial incentive for insurance plans to cover services that evidence shows actually work to help people with serious mental illness live more independently.
Services like what?
Well, one item that jumped out to me, sending nurses, social workers, and psychiatrists to people's homes or wherever they are to help them manage their medical health, their mental health, their day-to-day lives. Again, here's California State Medicaid Director Tyler Sadwith.
We know that it leads to fewer emergency department visits, fewer inpatient hospital and psychiatric facility admissions, increased participation in the community. Our goal with these services is to make a reality in our communities that we know to be possible through the literature.
And it's not just medical services either, Dan. The state knows that social services can be just as crucial here to keeping folks stable. Through the pilot, people can also get help finding and keeping a job, even in some cases help paying rent for a few months.
Leslie, California's plan sure sounds good, but I also know from our other reporting that mental health providers are facing staffing shortages, budget crunches, plus major Medicaid cuts coming out of Washington, D.C.
That's absolutely right. There is a lot of uncertainty ahead here, Dan.
So I'm curious, zooming out of California, which I know is very early in its journey, do we have any data yet on how this is playing out in other states who've been at this longer?
Not as much as I thought we would. There's some interim data, Dan. It's a very mixed bag so far. Some states, like Indiana, are seeing a lot more folks getting care in institutional settings. Others are not. And it's not at all clear if those stays are making people safer or healthier in the long run. Federal health officials did tell me they plan to publish more data later this year, but at least this one former Obama mental health official, John O'Brien, told me he's not holding his breath.
I would still love to have data showing that this works, but, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see that in my lifetime.
John and others said, given the limited information being collected here, they doubt that this pilot project will answer the big questions that have long loomed over this kind of institutional care. Do these facilities actually improve people's health? And do they keep people safe?
And when you have this lack of evidence, this is something that I've seen throughout my career as a healthcare reporter, it's basically impossible to know what or who is right. In this case, sure, we can guarantee these psychiatric institutions won't be perfect. I mean, no healthcare provider is, right? But will they be better than some of the places where people are ending up now, in jail and on the streets?
That's right. Danny's experience captures the breadth of what could happen. The time he was given too much independence, too fast. The place that landed him in jail. And now, he's here.
My name is Danny. I try my best to be a better friend or family and stuff.
Trying, as he says, to be a better friend and family member. Danny lives in a kind of closely supervised residential community about 20 miles south of San Jose. What else do you want people to know?
Well, I care for my friends, I care for my family, I care for people.
I care for my friends. I care for my family. I care for people, says Danny. He ended up in this spot after a stabilizing stint in another one of those locked institutions. And Teresa says something finally clicked.
To me, it's about getting the right care at the right time in the right place.
Danny has lived in this community for 6 years now. He struggles to talk, but he told me that he feels safe. He's got a girlfriend. He does wish he had more freedom, but he says he likes the staff. They take him to the corner store to get his Pepsis and Mountain Dews. For his mom, Teresa, Danny's newfound stability is bittersweet.
I just think back all those years ago. It's like, what if he would have gone there sooner? We have to have a system that's like we have for every other illness. This is a chronic illness of the brain, and you need to have all levels of care available when people need it. And you can't depend on families or, homeless shelters to be that system. It's just wrong.
The truth, Dan, is nobody can say with any certainty, right, what's worked for Danny this time or why. But even without that clear answer, policymakers see this problem as just too big to leave alone.
Leslie Walker, thank you for your reporting on this story.
You're welcome, Dan.
In Washington, D.C., some officials want to go even bigger than this pilot project. President Trump recently signed an executive order that could force more people into mental institutions against their will. A bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced a bill in the House that would open up a whole bunch more Medicaid funding for these facilities. If that policy comes to pass, it could cost taxpayers roughly $3 billion a year. Whether that would be money well spent remains an open question. I'm Dan Gorenstein. This is Tradeoffs. Buying an Obamacare plan is about to get more expensive. Federal subsidies to shop for coverage on the marketplaces are scheduled to get smaller starting in January. Many expect some consumers to be priced out and some insurance companies to drop out.
I think there was a view at the beginning that, in fact, these would be a lot like Amazon. I think we'd all be pretty happy if they were like Amazon.
Where's the big bustling market for health insurance? Why aren't the exchanges more like Amazon? That's next time on Tradeoffs.
Thanks for listening to Tradeoffs. If you've just discovered us, remember to subscribe to the feed so you never miss an episode. Subscribing is free and easy on whichever podcasting app you use, the NPR app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. The Tradeoffs team is producers Ryan Levy and Melanie Evans, editor Deborah Franklin, executive director Jessica Silverman, marketing director Catherine Dougal, with help from Kate Seepy, Cedric Wilson, Haley Lerner, and Colleen Schenk, sound designer Andrew Perella, executive editor Dan Gorenstein, and senior producer Leslie Walker. The Tradeoffs theme song was composed by Ty Sitterman, with additional music this episode from Blue Dot Sessions and Epidemic Sound. Tradeoffs reporting for this story was supported in part by the California Healthcare Foundation and the Sociology Foundation. Special thanks to Jacqueline Bockham, Carolyn Gorman, Stephen Ide, Samuel Jane, Linda Kaufman, Tanya Moore, Joe Parks, Ryan Quist, and Jen Snow. Thanks also to all our listeners who helped to support our work, including Sarah Emond, Hannah Neprash, Marie Christensen, Cynthia Chilton, and George Hammond. Our media partner is Side Effects Public Media, based at WFYI. Tradeoffs is supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Arnold Ventures, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Sociology Foundation, Just Trust, West Health, the California Healthcare Foundation, the Foundation for Opioid Response Efforts, and the Leonard Davis Institute at the University of Pennsylvania. Our financial supporters are not involved in any decisions about our journalism. The views expressed in this episode are those of the individuals and not those of Tradeoffs staff, advisors, or funders.